Have you ever witnessed a moment so uncomfortable, so painfully out of line, that it made you stop in your tracks and just think, did that really just happen? That's exactly what went down in a quiet high school auditorium, right in the middle of a Veterans Day assembly. And trust me, what started off as a normal school event turned into something nobody in that room could forget. Now, before you scroll away or think this is just another lesson learned story, let me tell you something. This story is about way more than a teen acting out. It's about pride, pain, silence, history, and the one moment that can flip a person's whole worldview upside down. And the best part? You're going to find out exactly how that happened, right here in this video. But let me ask you, honestly, how would you feel if someone, right in front of a room full of people, openly disrespected someone who had sacrificed everything for your freedom? Would you stay quiet? Would you speak up? Would you even recognize the disrespect in the first place? See, sometimes the biggest lessons in life don't come from a classroom, or from textbooks, or from lectures. They come from moments that punch you in the gut and shake something awake inside you. This story? It's exactly that kind of moment. Now, I know the title grabbed your attention. Maybe you clicked this video out of curiosity. Maybe you've seen something like this happen before, or maybe you just want to know, what happened to this teen who refused to stand for a veteran, and what exactly did he learn the hard way? You've come to the right place because by the end of the story, you're going to have that answer. And not just the answer to what happened, but why it happened, how it played out, and what came after. So if you've ever found yourself frustrated with today's generation, or maybe even confused by them, this story is going to hit home in more ways than one. Stay with me because every second you're here, we're going deeper into something real, something layered, and something that just might challenge the way you see the world around you. This story begins on a chilly November morning in small-town Indiana, where the high school gymnasium was decked out in red, white, and blue. It was Veterans Day, a time to honor those who served. The bleachers were packed with students, teachers, local parents, and several veterans from the community, some of whom were in their 70s, walking in with canes and careful steps, but holding their heads high. The national anthem was about to start, and as tradition goes, everyone was expected to rise. Students shuffled to their feet, murmuring softly, some with hands over hearts, some checking their phones, but most at least trying to show respect. But one teen, tall, slouched, hoodie up, stayed seated. Arms crossed, eyes staring dead ahead. No emotion, no effort, just still. At first, no one really noticed, but then people around him started glancing over. A teacher whispered something, a few students snickered, and that's when it became impossible to ignore. A veteran seated in the front row, Mr. Harold Jenkins, a retired Marine who'd served 3 tours overseas and lost 2 close friends in combat, turned his head slowly and locked eyes with the teen. It wasn't a look of anger. It wasn't even disappointment. It was something deeper, like a silent question hanging in the air. Do you even understand what this moment means? And that's where it all starts. Now, before we go further, I want to take a second to speak directly to you, the one watching this. I know how these stories usually go. Maybe you're expecting a dramatic confrontation. Maybe you think the teen gets humiliated and the veteran gives some powerful speech that changes his life. Maybe you've seen a dozen of these on your feed. But this one? It's different. I'm not here to just give you a predictable, respect your elders lecture. I want to bring you into this moment to make you feel what the people in that gym felt. To see both sides. Because this story isn't just about respect. It's about pain, pride, misunderstanding, and the invisible war going on between generations. If you stick with me till the end, you're going to see how a single act of defiance turned into a life-altering wake-up call, not just for that teen, but for everyone in the room. And if you're still here, it means you're ready to go a little deeper than the surface. So let's go. Let me tell you about the teen first. His name's Caleb. 17 years old. Junior in high school. Smart kid, sharper than most give him credit for. But like a lot of teens these days, he's grown up in a world filled with noise. Social media, controversy, protest culture, viral outrage, all of it. He's got opinions. A lot of them. And he's not afraid to stand, or in this case sit, for what he believes in. You see, Caleb wasn't just being lazy. He didn't stay seated because he didn't feel like standing. He stayed seated because he chose to. And behind that choice was a personal story, a lot of pain, and a belief that, in his mind, was just as valid as anyone else's. On the other side, you've got Mr. Jenkins, a man who's seen the worst of war and somehow came back stronger. Lost friends, lost years, but never lost faith in the country he served. He's not the kind to seek attention. In fact, he rarely even talks about his service. But on this day, he agreed to speak at the assembly. He brought his medals, his uniform, even a photo of his platoon. He stood there, preparing to talk to these kids about sacrifice, about honor, about things he'd lived. So when he saw Caleb sitting there during the anthem, something in him paused. Not rage, not even confusion, just stillness, like a crack in the moment. And that's where the tension begins. But before we dive into what happened next, the confrontation, the moment that changed everything, I want to ask you something. Have you ever felt misunderstood? Have you ever felt like you were trying to make a statement and nobody saw your heart, they just judged your action? Or maybe you've been on the other side, watching someone behave in a way that seemed totally wrong, only to realize later there was more to the story. That's exactly what this video is about. More to the story. That's why I want you to watch till the very end, because every minute reveals a new piece of the puzzle. And by the time we reach the end, you'll understand why things unfolded the way they did, and how one moment of defiance turned into a turning point that no one could have seen coming. Now, I know attention spans are short. I get it. But if you can give me just a few more minutes, I promise you won't regret it. Because this story, it's real. It's raw. And whether you're a student, a parent, a teacher, a veteran, or someone just scrolling through YouTube late at night, it's going to make you feel something. And that, my friend, is why this video exists. You're not just watching a story, you're part of it now. So here's what you're about to find out. What pushed Caleb to make his choice that morning? What happened when Mr. Jenkins finally walked over to him after the assembly? And what was said between them that left the entire gym speechless and led to something that would end up on the local news just 48 hours later? This isn't just about right or wrong. It's about what happens when two very different people collide and what it takes to bridge the space between them. But before I tell you what Mr. Jenkins said, the exact words that stopped Caleb cold in his tracks and silenced the entire room, I want to take you back just 24 hours earlier, because that's where the real story begins. The day before the assembly, Caleb had already been walking through the halls of Jefferson High with something heavy on his shoulders, though you wouldn't have known it just by looking at him. On the surface, he was just another teenager trying to get through another week of school. Hoodie up, earbuds in, backpack slung low, he blended into the crowd like background noise. But those closest to him, the few who really paid attention, could see it. There was something different in his energy lately, something that had been building for weeks. Teachers thought it was just typical teenage moodiness. His guidance counselor chalked it up to stress. But his best friend, Malik, knew better. He'd seen Caleb disappear into himself more and more since the start of the semester, and when he asked what was going on, all Caleb ever said was, "Just tired of the fake stuff, man." Now here's where it starts to get a little complicated. See, Caleb had always been the type to speak his mind, but not in the loud, confrontational way most people expect. He wasn't the kind to yell or cause a scene. He played it cool, almost too cool sometimes, which made people assume he didn't care. But that wasn't it. Caleb cared a lot, just not always about what everyone else thought he should. Over the past few months, he'd gotten deep into political documentaries, activist content on TikTok, and some heavy podcasts about generational trauma, injustice, and how blind patriotism could sometimes overlook real problems in the country. The algorithms fed him more of that content the more he watched, and he started seeing things differently. To him, standing for the flag wasn't just a tradition anymore. It was a loaded symbol, something that brought up questions more than it gave answers. And as Veterans Day approached, those questions started burning hotter in his mind. But there was more to it than that. 2 weeks before the assembly, Caleb had an argument with his history teacher, Mr. Foster, over a class project about American wars. Caleb had challenged the assignment, saying it painted too clean a picture of what soldiers went through and ignored the political corruption behind some of those conflicts. Mr. Foster pushed back, saying it wasn't the time or place for debate, and that's when Caleb started feeling like no one really listened. He wasn't trying to disrespect anyone, he just wanted space for different perspectives. But that conversation left a mark, and ever since, he'd been pulling further away from his teachers, his classmates, and even Malik. Something about that exchange convinced him that no one in that school really wanted the truth, they just wanted obedience. And still, there's more. Caleb's older brother, Jordan, had joined the military straight out of high school. He was the pride of the family, the golden child everyone talked about at holidays. But he and Caleb had barely spoken in months. Jordan was stationed overseas, and when he called home, it was mostly quick check-ins and surface-level small talk. Caleb never felt like he could be real with him. What he didn't tell anyone, not even Malik, was that a few months earlier, Jordan had confided in him during a late-night call that he was struggling. Struggling to sleep, struggling to cope, feeling like a number instead of a person. He didn't go into detail, but the weight in his voice told Caleb everything. That phone call stuck with him, especially as Veterans Day got closer. Everyone at school talked about the military like it was this pure, noble thing, but Caleb had seen the cracks. He'd heard them in his brother's voice. And part of him couldn't shake the feeling that standing during the anthem would mean pretending those cracks didn't exist. But let's not make it too easy. This story isn't just about a teen caught in quiet rebellion. There are other layers here, layers even he didn't know about. Let's go back to Mr. Foster for a second. The history teacher who clashed with Caleb wasn't just a veteran himself. He had served alongside Mr. Jenkins during one of the roughest deployments in Iraq. Most people didn't know that, and Foster never really talked about it, but he was one of the ones who pushed hard for the school to invite Jenkins to speak at the assembly. Some say he even called in a few favors to make it happen. So when Caleb refused to stand, it wasn't just a silent act, it felt personal to Foster. But here's the twist. Foster and Jenkins hadn't spoken in nearly 10 years, ever since a falling out over something that happened during their final tour. What exactly happened has always been a bit murky. Whispers, rumors, fragments of half-truths passed around by people who weren't there. Some said Jenkins walked away from a decision that cost lives. Others said Foster blamed him unfairly. Whatever it was, they hadn't been in the same room together since. Until now. Which brings us to something strange that happened the day before the assembly, something even Caleb didn't notice. Around lunchtime, a security camera in the school hallway caught a brief, but tense exchange between Foster and Jenkins when the veteran came to check in with the school staff ahead of the event. No one else was around. No students. No other teachers. Just the two of them standing outside the administrative office, exchanging low words and sharp glances. The footage didn't have audio, but body language says a lot. Jenkins's arms were crossed, his face hard and still. Foster looked agitated, his finger jabbing at the ground like he was making a point. Then suddenly, Jenkins walked away. That was it. But something about that moment hung in the air, like unfinished business. And here's where things start to blur. The morning of the assembly, Malik noticed something odd about Caleb. Not just the usual distance, but a kind of nervous energy he hadn't seen before. Caleb kept checking his phone, eyes flicking between the screen and the auditorium doors like he was waiting for something or someone. Malik asked if everything was cool, and Caleb just nodded, said, "Yeah, just thinking." But his tone didn't match the words. And later, when the anthem played and Caleb stayed seated, Malik watched his face carefully. There was no smirk, no defiance. Just silence. A kind of stillness that felt less like protest and more like grief. Meanwhile, Jenkins had been keeping his eyes on the students from the moment he stepped on the stage. His speech was typed out, prepared, but as he looked over the sea of young faces, something made him pause. And when he saw Caleb sitting still, hoodie up, arms folded, he didn't just see a kid refusing to stand. He saw a symbol, maybe even a mirror. And in that moment, Jenkins made a decision that no one expected. He stepped away from the podium and walked directly toward Caleb's row. Not fast. Not angry. Just deliberate. The gym got quiet. Too quiet. Teachers stiffened. Students turned. Malik looked up, his breath caught in his throat. And Caleb, he didn't move. But we're not there yet. Because before Jenkins reached Caleb, something happened. Something that no one, not even the principal, saw coming. And what happened in the next 90 seconds turned the entire day upside down and opened the door to truths that had been buried for far too long. So, what was it? Well, you'll see. But only if you're ready to keep going. Because this story's only just getting started. Just as Jenkins began to make his quiet walk toward Caleb's row, a ripple of confusion stirred in the crowd. Not from him, not from Caleb, but from something entirely unexpected. It started when a student near the back of the gym, Maria Santiago, reached into her jacket pocket after feeling her phone buzz repeatedly, even though phones were supposed to be off during assemblies. At first, she thought it was just her group chat going off about the whole Caleb not standing situation. But what she saw made her stomach drop. It was a message. Not from anyone she recognized. No name. No contact photo. Just a random number with an eerie string of words. He's not the only one who knows. Ask Caleb about the photo. You have 2 days. There was no context, no attachment, just that. And the way it hit her, out of nowhere, sent a chill crawling up her spine. Because Maria and Caleb weren't exactly close, but they weren't strangers either. They had history. Not romantic, but academic. The kind where you work on a group project for 2 weeks and walk away knowing a little too much about someone's life, even if you never talk about it again. And during that project last semester, Maria remembered Caleb showing her something on his phone, a photo, maybe a screenshot, something that he said wasn't for school. She hadn't thought about it since. Until now. The gym was quiet, everyone staring at Jenkins as he slowly approached, and Maria's hands trembled as she slipped her phone back into her jacket. She didn't say anything. Not yet. But her mind was already racing. What photo? Who sent that message? And why her? Meanwhile, up front, the atmosphere had shifted. What was supposed to be a calm, respectful ceremony had morphed into a slow-building storm of tension. Every eye was locked on Jenkins, and every breath in the room felt suspended in the space between his footsteps. Caleb didn't flinch, didn't look away, and Jenkins didn't rush. But right as he reached the edge of the row, seconds before anyone could speak, a loud crack came from the back corner of the gym. It wasn't a gunshot, though that's what some thought at first. It was a metal chair collapsing under the weight of a kid who'd passed out. Nerves, heat, maybe something more. But the sound echoed through the space like a thunderclap. Chaos rippled for a moment. Teachers rushed over. Students whispered. Phones lit up. And in that tiny window of distraction, Jenkins paused, looked back, and made a choice. He turned away from Caleb. Just like that. Walked back to the podium without a word, and began his speech like nothing had happened. But something had happened. And it was only beginning to unfold. Back in the cafeteria later that day, word had spread fast. Kids were replaying the moment from every angle. The phrase, "he didn't even stand for the anthem," was trending locally on TikTok, clips edited with dramatic music, mixed opinions in the comments. Some called Caleb brave. Others called him ignorant. But beneath all the noise, something else was moving. Quietly. Maria hadn't told anyone about the message yet, but her anxiety was bubbling. She tried calling the number, nothing. No voicemail. Just dead air. Then, while scrolling through her gallery to find any trace of the photo Caleb might have shown her, she found something odd. A folder she didn't remember creating, named only 121. Inside it, one image. Black and white. Grainy. Almost like a scanned document. It looked like a military ID, but the name had been blurred out and the date redacted. In the corner, partially visible, was something she recognized but couldn't place, a symbol, like a badge or patch. It looked familiar, but wrong, like it had been doctored. The strangest part? The file was dated 3 days ago. She hadn't downloaded anything recently. She hadn't even used her photo app since the weekend. She didn't know it yet, but that symbol had a direct connection to Jenkins and Foster. A connection that went all the way back to that final tour, the one they never talked about. And someone, somewhere, clearly didn't want it forgotten. Back on the other side of the school, Caleb sat in the library after lunch, headphones in but no music playing. Just silence. He wasn't scrolling, wasn't texting. He was staring at something on his screen. An email, old, unread, and still flagged. Subject line: "You weren't supposed to see this." He'd received it 2 weeks ago. No sender name. Just another random string of numbers and letters. The body of the email contained a single line: "Tell the truth about what you found, or someone else will." And beneath it, a broken link. It hadn't worked since the day he got it. Caleb never mentioned it to anyone. Not Malik. Not Maria. Not even his mom.
He just buried it.
But now, in the aftermath of the assembly, it was resurfacing in his head like a splinter he couldn't ignore. And then came another twist. That afternoon, the school's IT department received an alert about a flagged device accessing restricted network files during the Veterans Day ceremony. The device was traced to a student's Chromebook, one assigned to Caleb. The access attempt had been brief, less than 20 seconds, but it triggered something deep in the firewall. The file in question? An archived yearbook from 2006. Harmless, on the surface. But the specific page accessed had been marked with internal notes years ago, tied to a faculty investigation that was later sealed. And on that page, a photo of a younger Harold Jenkins and Thomas Foster, standing side by side, smiling. Behind them, barely visible, was a third man. Face half-turned, expression unreadable. No name listed. Just a note scribbled in faded ink. He left. We never asked why.
Who was he?
Why did Caleb access that file? And more importantly, who else knew? As the school started to close down for the day and the lights dimmed in the hallways, shadows stretched a little longer than usual. Maria walked past Caleb without saying a word, but their eyes met briefly. Something silent passing between them. An understanding. A fear. A question they couldn't quite voice yet. And somewhere in that building, someone else was watching. Someone who had been waiting for the right moment to strike. Because the truth wasn't buried, it had just been ignored.
And now?
Now it was clawing its way back to the surface. But you'll have to keep watching to find out who's behind it. Because nothing is what it seems. And everyone has something to hide. By the time the sun had dipped behind the horizon and the halls of Jefferson High were mostly dark, the atmosphere had shifted from tense to eerily quiet, like the silence that settles in right before something breaks. Caleb didn't go straight home after school. Instead, he found himself back in the empty library, seated at one of the back tables, his Chromebook open but untouched. He kept replaying the day in his head, the anthem, the eyes on him, Jenkins walking his way, and then turning back. But more than anything, he kept thinking about the email. That one-line message, cryptic and chilling. Tell the truth about what you found, or someone else will. For weeks, he'd pushed it aside, trying to convince himself it was just some troll, someone trying to mess with him after the argument with Mr. Foster. But now something about it felt too precise. Too timed. Like someone had been waiting for him to reach this exact point. That's when Malik showed up. He'd been trying to reach Caleb all day, finally found him in the library and slid into the chair across from him, out of breath and visibly rattled. "Bro, we need to talk," he said, eyes darting around like someone might be listening. Malik wasn't usually like this. He was the type to brush things off, laugh through the tension, keep things chill. But not tonight. He pulled out his phone, unlocked it, and handed it to Caleb. "Look at this." Caleb leaned forward and saw the message.
Different number this time.
Different wording, but the same tone. "He's lying to you. Ask about Camp Sable before someone else does."
Camp Sable.
The words hit like a gut punch. Caleb had seen that name before, but only once. It had been buried in a photo description, a digital file he accessed accidentally while looking through archived documents for a class assignment. At the time, he thought it was just a military base or some old training ground. He clicked out of it almost immediately. But now, hearing it again, paired with Malik's message and knowing Maria had received something too, it couldn't be random. Before Caleb could respond, Malik leaned in lower and said something that stopped everything cold. "I think Jenkins and Foster are covering something up." At first, Caleb didn't believe it. Jenkins was a decorated Marine. Foster, for all his stiffness, seemed like the kind of guy who lived and breathed honor.
But Malik went on.
He explained that his uncle, who used to work in records for the Department of Veterans Affairs, once mentioned Camp Sable in passing years ago. It wasn't a base. It wasn't even officially listed. It was an overseas black site, used briefly during a covert operation that was never meant to see the light of day. There had been rumors about civilian casualties, unauthorized intel exchanges, and one mission that went sideways so badly no one ever spoke of it again. Malik's uncle only knew about it because he processed a case for a discharged soldier who had a breakdown and claimed he left someone behind at Sable. The name Harold Jenkins wasn't mentioned directly, but the dates matched. Caleb sat there, silent. Pieces were clicking in a way he didn't expect. What if the assembly wasn't just about honoring veterans? What if it was part of a cover? A way to bury something deeper under the surface of tradition and ceremony? And more than that, what if he had been pulled into it by accident? Then the twist came. Maria called. Not texted, called. Her voice was frantic, breathless. She said she'd been digging through old email attachments from their group project months ago, looking for the original file they'd used for citations, and stumbled across something hidden in a zipped folder. Not just the yearbook page, but a voice recording. Short, crackly, maybe 15 seconds long. She played it on speaker. A man's voice. Muffled, panicked. They said to keep quiet, or it's on me. I didn't know they'd go that far. Foster. Jenkins, they signed it. They all knew. Caleb's dad, he warned me before he... The recording cut off. Silence followed. Caleb's face went pale. Because his father, who had died when Caleb was only 7, had never been spoken of in any military context. As far as he knew, his dad was a factory worker. A quiet man, never talked about combat or deployments. The family never had a folded flag. There was no funeral with medals or uniforms. Just a closed casket and a lot of unanswered questions. Until now. And just like that, everything flipped. Caleb wasn't just some defiant teenager making a quiet protest. He was connected to something far older. Something buried. A legacy he didn't even know he had. And Jenkins, who had stared him down during the anthem, might have known the whole time. So might Foster. The whole performance, the speech, the stare, the silence, it wasn't just about disrespect. It was about recognition. Maybe even fear. Because if Caleb ever uncovered the truth, it could expose them all.
And now?
Now the countdown had begun. The next message, from a third unknown number, came through before they could even leave the library. Too late. They know you're looking. And from that point forward, trust was off the table. Everyone had secrets. And no one was safe. The weight of it all didn't hit Caleb until later that night, long after the last message had come through, and he found himself alone in his room, surrounded by memories that suddenly felt distorted. His walls were still covered in posters, music artists' protest quotes, a few Polaroids from last summer, but now they looked different, like pieces of a life he wasn't sure he understood anymore. That voice in the recording, the man who said his father warned him, it kept looping in his head like a track he couldn't stop replaying. Every time it reached the part about Jenkins and Foster, his chest tightened. But it wasn't just fear. It was confusion, guilt, anger. Because if that voice was telling the truth, then his whole life had been built on a lie. And the man he'd looked up to as just a quiet, working-class father might have been part of something much darker. Something buried. Something dangerous. But what crushed Caleb more than anything was what he hadn't told Malik or Maria, not even in the library, not when everything was spiraling. A few weeks earlier, right before the Veterans Day assembly had been announced, Caleb's mom had found a box in the attic. She didn't make a big deal out of it. Just left it on the dining table and said, "It's probably your dad's old stuff. See if there's anything you want to keep." At the time, Caleb had barely glanced at it. A few faded photos, worn-out documents, an old cassette player with no tape. But buried beneath everything was a small notebook. Brown leather, worn to the point the binding was splitting. Inside, the handwriting was jagged, inconsistent, some pages smudged, others intentionally torn. And toward the back, on a nearly blank page, were 2 words in capital letters, "Sable Stays." At the time, it made no sense. Just another scribbled phrase in a book of half-thoughts.
But now?
Now it screamed at him. He grabbed the notebook from his dresser and stared at those 2 words for a long time. He didn't want to believe it. But deep down, some part of him had always known his dad was more than what people said. That his death wasn't just a random accident at work, like they told him. That the sealed casket, the closed-door funeral, the way his mother changed afterward, like something had been taken from her, not just someone. It all pointed to something else. And now, standing here years later, that something else was clawing its way out of the past with teeth. His phone buzzed again. Another message. This one didn't come from a blocked number. It was from his mom. "Can you come downstairs?
We need to talk. Now."
His heart dropped. She never messaged like that. Not short. Not formal. Something was off. He walked down, the notebook clenched in his hand, palms sweating, every step feeling heavier than the last. She was waiting in the kitchen, arms crossed, her face pale but composed. And when she looked at him, it wasn't with confusion. It was with knowing. Like she'd been waiting for this moment longer than he could understand. "I got a call," she said, voice tight. "From someone I haven't heard from in 15 years. He said, if you keep asking questions, something bad might happen."
Not just to you.
She swallowed hard. To all of us. Caleb's throat closed. "Who was it?" She hesitated. "I don't know his name, but his voice that sounded like someone your father once worked with. Back when we were stationed near Fort Bragg." That was the first time she'd ever acknowledged they were connected to the military. Ever. And the look in her eyes, part regret, part terror, confirmed everything Caleb was afraid of. He pressed the notebook into her hand. "You knew about this?" he asked, the words breaking as they left him. "About Camp Sable? About Jenkins? About Foster?" She nodded slowly. "I knew pieces. But I stayed quiet for a reason. We were told after your father died that if we ever spoke out, there would be consequences. Real ones. And I couldn't risk losing you too." The silence after that was unbearable. The air in the room felt like glass, so fragile it could shatter with a whisper. Caleb looked at her, and for the first time in his life, he saw her not as his mom, but as someone who had carried the weight of something monstrous for years alone. But that didn't erase the anger, the betrayal, the feeling that everyone had known something except him. Then she hit him with it, the ultimatum. "They contacted me again. Tonight. They said you have one chance to walk away. If you delete everything, your files, your messages, stop talking to those other kids, they'll leave us alone. But if you don't, they'll come for you first." Caleb froze. It wasn't just a threat. It was a choice. His safety or the truth. Silence or answers. If he stayed quiet, maybe they'd back off. Maybe his mom would stop looking over her shoulder. Maybe this nightmare would end. But if he kept digging, if he followed the trail, pushed for what really happened to his dad and the others, there was no going back. And the people he trusted most might already be compromised. Malik, Maria,
Foster.
Even Jenkins. Any one of them could be playing both sides. He didn't know who to trust. He didn't know what came next. All he knew was this. The truth wasn't just buried. It was protected. And someone was willing to do anything to keep it that way. Let me know when you're ready for the next turn, because the next move Caleb makes will either expose everything or get someone hurt. Caleb didn't sleep that night. He couldn't. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw shadows creeping at the edge of memory. His father's face, that broken recording, the moment Jenkins stared him down in the gym like he already knew what Caleb was about to uncover. And now his mom, confirming that something terrible had been buried beneath the surface of their quiet suburban life all along, was telling him to walk away, to forget. But how could he? How could he sleep under the same roof, where his father's secrets had been boxed up and hidden in plain sight? How could he sit in the same classroom with Mr. Foster, knowing now that the man who once scolded him for disrespect might have been responsible for the very reason his family was fractured in the first place? By morning, everything felt different. His mind was sharper, eyes wide open. Malik texted at dawn. "Meet at the park. Something's happened." Maria was already there when Caleb arrived, standing near the empty basketball court, pacing. She didn't say a word when she saw him. She just handed him her phone again. This time, it wasn't a message. It was a live feed. A burner account on a niche live streaming platform had gone live just 30 minutes ago with a title that punched like a headline: Camp Sable Whistleblower Speaks. At first, Caleb thought it was clickbait. But as the stream buffered and the video came into focus, the face on the screen froze him in place. It was Jenkins.
Live. In real time.
Sitting in what looked like a motel room, blinds drawn, bags under his eyes, sweat on his collar. He was speaking carefully, pausing between sentences like he expected someone to barge in at any moment. "I don't know how long this will stay up," Jenkins said into the webcam. "I've been running for a while now. Thought I could let it go. Thought I could live with what we did at Sable. But I can't. Not anymore. Not after seeing that kid in the gym." Caleb felt his knees go weak. "I knew his father," Jenkins continued. "We served together. Not just in the Marines, but on that op. The one we were told to erase from our memory. The one Foster swore we'd never mention. But we left someone behind. A civilian. Not an enemy. Not a threat. A man who had proof that the mission wasn't what it seemed. That we weren't just liberating. We were extracting something. Something classified." He paused, looked down, exhaled. "Your father found out. And they made sure he didn't live to tell anyone." Then the screen went black.
Just like that.
No warning. No buffering. No error code. The stream cut mid-sentence, and the account was gone seconds later.
Wiped.
Maria refreshed again and again, but there was nothing. The video was scrubbed like it never existed. And that's when the real panic set in. Caleb realized this wasn't just about his dad or Jenkins, or some sealed operation in a forgotten part of the world. This was bigger. A network. A cover-up that extended beyond the school, beyond the military. Someone was watching them in real time. Someone powerful enough to shut down a live stream within seconds of truth being spoken out loud. Then Malik broke the silence. "I think Mr. Foster's not just part of it. I think he's the one who started it." Caleb blinked. "What do you mean?" Malik reached into his backpack and pulled out a folder. This was in my uncle's garage. Old VA records, sealed files he kept after he left the department. Said he kept it for protection in case those men ever came back. He opened the folder to a document with water-stained edges and redacted blocks of text. This is Foster's signature. Same name. Same ID number. He wasn't just a soldier. He was an operative, recruited into a special intelligence task force after Sable. They scrubbed his record, reassigned him under an education program, gave him a new life. That life is right here at Jefferson High. Caleb stared at the document like it was burning through his hands. Foster had been planted. A handler, sent to watch, to monitor, maybe even control the narrative in case any of the past bled through. And now that Caleb had started asking questions, the walls were closing in fast. And that's when the betrayal hit. Maria's phone buzzed again. Another message. But this one wasn't anonymous. It was from Jenkins. "They got to me. I couldn't tell the whole truth. You need to talk to your principal. He knows everything. But be careful, he's not working alone." The three of them just stood there. Frozen. Wind rustling through the trees. A normal morning everywhere else, but not here. Not anymore. Because Jenkins had just confirmed the worst. There were more people involved. People inside the school. People with access to student records, schedules, surveillance. People who could rewrite the narrative before it ever reached the public. Caleb's mind was spinning. His principal, Mr. Reynolds, was a veteran too. Everyone respected him. He ran the school like a tight ship, always visible, always calm. But now Caleb was realizing just how much he didn't know about the man who walked those halls every day. And if Jenkins was right, then Reynolds wasn't just a bystander. He was part of the design. Caleb looked to Maria and Malik, his voice barely above a whisper. "We need to decide.
Now.
If we walk away, they'll stop watching us. We go back to pretending this never happened. Or we go in. We confront Reynolds. Get the truth. Even if it gets us expelled. Even if it gets us hurt. The air shifted again. No more theories. No more whispers. This was the moment everything changed. The line between truth and survival had blurred completely. And the only thing that was clear now was this. There was no going back. Because this wasn't just Caleb's story anymore. It was everyone's. And the clock was running out. The halls of Jefferson High were empty when Caleb, Maria, and Malik walked back in that evening, the kind of quiet that doesn't just mean silence. It means something is watching. The sun had dipped below the horizon hours ago, but the gym lights were still on, glowing behind the tall windows like a beacon pulling them forward. Principal Reynolds had called an emergency staff meeting, or so the announcement said. But there were no cars in the lot. No teachers milling about. Just one light on in his office, and the building humming with the kind of stillness that feels wrong. Caleb's pulse hammered in his ears as they pushed through the main doors, every instinct screaming to turn back, but he couldn't. Not now, not after everything they'd uncovered. This wasn't about a disrespectful moment during the national anthem anymore. This was about secrets buried so deep. The only way to bring them into the light was to drag them out yourself, even if it cost you everything. As they moved through the hallway, Maria tightened her grip on the manila folder containing Jenkins' suppressed testimony and the sealed files from Malik's uncle. The documents were enough to ruin careers, maybe even spark an official investigation, but that wouldn't matter unless they confronted the man who held the last piece of the puzzle. Principal Reynolds, decorated Army vet, community leader, the quiet shadow behind the curtain the whole time. And now, with everything boiling over, they were going to put the truth in his face and force him to acknowledge it. Or so they thought. Reynolds' office door was slightly ajar, a faint light spilling into the hallway. Caleb knocked, not bothering to hide his voice. "We know what happened at Camp Sable. We know what you and Foster and Jenkins were covering up." The door creaked open, revealing Reynolds seated behind his desk, calm, collected, like he'd been expecting them the whole time. There was no shock in his expression. No denial. Just the cold resignation of a man who'd run out of moves, or maybe one who had one left that no one could see. "I was wondering how long it would take," he said, gesturing to the chairs opposite his desk like this was just another disciplinary meeting. "I knew Jenkins would break eventually. He always had a soft spot for the truth." Caleb stepped in first, his voice shaking not with fear, but fury. "You lied to this whole town. You let us believe our families were safe, that our school was normal, and all this time you were protecting a mission that got my father killed." Reynolds nodded, not in agreement, but in understanding. "Your father was a good man. Too good. He thought exposing Sable would make a difference. He didn't understand how deep it went. That operation wasn't about war. It wasn't about defense. It was about intel blackmail. We weren't just soldiers. We were cleaners. We scrubbed loose ends, people who'd seen too much. Your dad stumbled across files that connected Sable to higher levels, senators, contractors, companies profiting off war zones. We warned him. We begged him to stay quiet. You silenced him." Maria snapped, stepping forward. "And then you came here, turned our school into your cover."
Why?
"Why this place?" Reynolds looked at her, his expression hardening. "Because this school was never just a school. It's where they place people like me, men with history. We keep an eye on families connected to Sable. Make sure the past stays buried. You think you're the only ones? Half the students here are connected. Parents, uncles, cousins. We've been watching for years. The anthem assembly wasn't about honor. It was a loyalty test. And Caleb failed it." Malik's fists clenched. "So, you were going to frame him? Make him look like the villain?" Reynolds stood, slow and deliberate. "We don't frame anyone. We just expose what's already there. But you kids made a mistake. You pushed too hard. Now you've given them an excuse to come clean it all up." Just then, footsteps echoed in the hallway. Heavy, purposeful. Not students. Not staff. Two men in black tactical jackets stepped through the main doors. No badges, no names. Government issue silence. Caleb looked between them and Reynolds, heart racing. You called them, he whispered. You knew we'd come.
They're not here for me, Reynolds said.
They're here for the files. That's when Maria made the split-second move that changed everything. She pulled out her phone, tapped the screen, and smiled. You're too late. The documents? The testimony? It's all been live streaming since we walked in. Facial recognition, voice print, location data. Half the internet just heard you admit everything. For the first time, Reynolds looked truly shaken. What platform? Red Wire. Malik grinned. Encrypted. Anonymous. Trending as we speak. The two agents froze, one of them reaching for a device on his wrist, the other glancing toward Reynolds for instruction. But it was over. Even if they shut down the stream now, it was out there, copied, downloaded, mirrored. The truth was already free. But just as Caleb let out a breath of relief, something shifted. Reynolds sat back down slowly, almost calm again. You think that's the end of it? That a live stream can stop this? You have no idea how deep this goes. You think they'll believe a few kids with a phone? This isn't a movie. It's reality. And in reality, the truth doesn't set you free. It makes you a target. Then came the twist. One of the agents stepped forward, not toward Caleb or Maria, but toward Reynolds. He reached into his jacket, pulled out a thin envelope, and dropped it on the desk. You've been compromised, the agent said coldly. We're here under different orders. You've gone too far. Reynolds froze. What are you talking about? You weren't supposed to let the boy connect the dots. You've endangered the program. Before any of them could react, the agents turned toward the door. One of them looked at Caleb. You didn't hear this from me. But your father, he was never the only one who tried to stop it. Then they were gone. Reynolds slumped in his chair like a man who had just realized he wasn't at the top of the pyramid. He was just another pawn. And in that final moment, Caleb understood. This wasn't just a conspiracy rooted in his father's death. It wasn't just a school or a cover-up. It was a system. And it was still alive. Let me know when you're ready for the final resolution, because the end isn't where you think it is. The days that followed blurred together, a strange quiet falling over Jefferson High like a fog that refused to lift. The halls were still filled with lockers and laughter, but everything beneath the surface had shifted. The story that exploded online, the leaked live stream, the revelations about Camp Sable, the names mentioned, had gone viral in a way no one expected. It wasn't just trending, it was being dissected, analyzed, twisted into threads and theories across YouTube, Reddit, and live stream panels. Influencers were reacting to it in real time. Headlines started to roll in from small independent outlets first, then from mainstream media, who could no longer ignore the noise. High school students leak hidden military operation tied to whistleblower's death. The truth had gotten out, but the response was colder, more fragmented than Caleb thought it would be. Some called it a hoax, others called it brave. Some spun it into partisan talking points. But through all the noise, one thing remained clear. The silence had finally been broken, and someone, somewhere, was listening. Reynolds disappeared the day after the live stream. No resignation. No goodbye. Just a sealed office and a vague statement from the school board about reassignments and mental health considerations. Foster's name was never officially connected, but his classes were handed over to substitutes, and students whispered about seeing unmarked sedans parked outside his neighborhood. Even Jenkins, who had tried to set it all straight in his own broken way, vanished without a trace. His motel room was found empty, keycard left in the door. Some said he fled. Others believed he was taken. Either way, he was gone, and with him, so was the last living piece of the original operation. It left a hole in Caleb that he didn't know how to name. Not grief, exactly. Not closure either. Just the realization that some truths, even when spoken out loud, still live in the shadows. Malik's uncle was contacted by Internal Affairs. He said they asked him if any other documents existed, anything that could link more names to the black site. He told them no. Burned what he had left. He wasn't scared, just tired. Maria's parents pulled her out of school for 2 weeks, afraid for her safety, but she came back stronger, more focused, like surviving the truth had turned her into someone sharper. The three of them were closer than ever, bound not by friendship alone, but by the kind of war most people would never see. They didn't talk about what they'd do if things went sideways again. They just made a pact: if one of them disappeared, the others would keep going. No silence. No retreat. As for Caleb, he stopped looking for more answers. Not because there weren't any left, but because he realized the most important truth wasn't in the files or the recordings. It was in the legacy his father left behind. Not a legacy of service or secrecy, but of courage. The kind of courage it takes to speak up when everyone else stays quiet. He stood in front of the same flag he once refused to rise for and understood now that it wasn't the symbol he rejected. It was the lie behind it. The illusion that honoring something meant never questioning it. But real respect, he learned, came from demanding better, from facing hard truths, even when they shattered everything you believed in. He kept the notebook his father left behind. Didn't show it to anyone. It wasn't evidence anymore. It was memory. A reminder that the truth, no matter how buried, always leaves traces. And one night, months later, when the world had moved on and the trending hashtags faded, he received one last message. No name, no number, just a photo. A picture of his father in uniform, standing beside someone Caleb didn't recognize, a woman in fatigues, holding the same notebook. On the back of the photo were 3 words scrawled in familiar handwriting. Not over yet. Caleb stared at it for a long time, heart pounding, thoughts racing, wondering if it meant what he feared or what he hoped. Maybe his father had known this would happen. Maybe he had left more than just a warning. Maybe there were others out there, like Jenkins, like his dad, people who had tried to fight but were forced underground. Maybe the truth hadn't just come to light. It had sparked something new. He tucked the photo inside the notebook, placed it back on his shelf, and sat in the stillness of his room, a quiet knowing settling over him. He didn't need answers anymore. He just needed to stay ready. Because some stories don't end with justice. Some stories end with a choice. And the next time that silence breaks, someone else will have to make it. That's the story. All of it. You were there for every moment, every turn, every hidden truth. But now the question becomes yours. What would you have done if it were you? Because sometimes the biggest lesson isn't what you find at the end. It's what you're willing to risk along the way. And somewhere out there, the next truth is waiting to be told.